Well, hello. It's been a while. I haven't made a video in a long time, and so tonight is the time I'm going to make another one. What prompted me to do this, you might ask? To put it bluntly, I basically have to make it unequivocally clear that due to this whole uh, thing about the torture report, coming out through the U.S. Senate Intelligence Committee. What I want to make absolutely clear about my channel is that I am totally against torture of any kind for whatever reason, because this kind of reasoning will always be expanded towards something else and something much worse, actually. So I stand against torture, against torturing our enemies, our perceived enemies, against torturing terrorists, however you want to call it. I am against it because it invariably backfires every time. So some of my viewers will say, well, look, most of these guys are terrorists, they're bad guys, they should have been jailed, they should have been tortured in order to get intelligence out of them, which, I mean, any sensible person knows that if you're going to torture somebody, yeah, they're going to tell you what you want to hear in order to make the torture stop. That's basically what a normal person would do. And on top of that, even let's say if you were a trained operative, okay? If you were a trained operative to do some harm towards a country, and you were, you were in some sort of a guerrilla network or something, and you weren't obviously, I mean, these people are not just operating out of a cave. I mean, that's ludicrous. So to say that guerrilla networks and so on aren't smart enough, to have their own regimen of plausible deniability. In other words, they operate just as other intelligence services do on a need-to-know basis, which means that whoever you capture, that person in this operation, and I will refer you to Jennifer Harbury's account of all of this, which I posted on my G Plus page. They, these people are not dumb. They are going to operate just like any other intelligence operation or any kind of clandestine operation. These particular individual operatives are not going to necessarily know what is going on in their entire network, which is why they don't have the specifics about any type of other operative that might be planning something specific. So this whole operation logistically doesn't make any sense, and morally, above all, it is just completely wrong. The problem I have with the American version of human rights and standing up for American human rights, or human rights in general, here's what I have a problem with. There is always this presumption of exceptionalism of our country, that we can do no wrong, that we have stood up for moral human values all over the globe, when in fact that is not true. We are not exceptional. This country is what, 275, 300 years old, okay? 300 years. And, the Europeans, basically, our population which lives here now are basically European immigrants and South American immigrants, wherever. They've been there. They've been there and done that. And they had their own empires. And once empires overreach, it always boils down to the same thing. They start overreaching. They start making stupid mistakes. They become arrogant. and they believe themselves to be exceptional. And our country here is no different. So this whole entire hypocrisy needs to be dropped from the very start. Americans need to understand that our government, for the past, at least, I mean, we could argue at least since its inception, okay? But let's just go, you know, a little bit more to the recent past, you know, since, let's say, the 1945, after the Second World War. Let's just take that period from then to now. The American government has been clandestinely supporting dictatorships and very unsavory characters all across the globe. We've toppled numerous duly elected governments. We have supported absolutely dictatorial regimes elsewhere, toppled leaders who were actually democratically elected, and clandestinely supported torture in other countries for a long period of time. So this torture report should come as no surprise to anyone who has read anything about world history and U.S. history in particular, especially when it comes to, you know, the subjects of Vietnam, Latin and South America, the U.S. manufactured death squads, supported death squads in South America and Latin America and so on. So this has gone on for a very long time, with the exception being now. At first, you know, it was all very hidden. This was something you ought not to do, because we were supposed to be the champions of human rights all across the globe. But, you know, the reality looks rather different. And if you want to look at all the declassified documents, which are readily available at the National Security Archives, you will come to a very different conclusion, namely that the United States has clandestinely supported very brutal regimes who engaged in the worst atrocities and torture methods for the last 70 years, perhaps even longer. And so, as someone who was involved as a member of years back, Amnesty International, I can tell you what those reports looked like. It was just absolutely disgusting to read what was going on. You know, eventually I sort of lost my, let's say, I felt that Amnesty International was no longer being objective. They were also being politically motivated not to show certain acts in which Americans were involved and so on. And so I felt, you know, there was a bit of bias there. So that's why I no longer supported them, because there was political manipulation going on behind the scenes. But regardless, you know, what I object to is this pronouncement that for some reason this nation is something exceptional. It's not. Our governments have been supporting the most hideous atrocities for a very long time. And to come back to the subject now, but now it is out in the open. In other words, certain elements within our government and even, you know, private individuals, private citizens are now coming out in full force supporting these atrocities. They're coming out in favor of it, while accusing other nations of doing the same stuff. This, to me, is the height of hypocrisy, and it is absolutely disgusting. If this nation has come to the point where you know, I'm not sure what if this is true, but if 50% of our citizens actually support torturing enemies, then we have sunk to such a moral low that any kind of blowback that happens as a result of that would not be all surprising. So that's what I have to say on the subject of torture, which, by the way, some of these techniques were adopted from the Russian KGB, the Israelis, which really perfected that whole thing in terms of not leaving any marks when you torture somebody. You know, you can do it without leaving any marks on somebody by basically breaking them psychologically. I mean, these methods are absolutely hideous. They're just as hideous as physical torture. And, you know, you don't have to, nowadays there's no need for, you know, burning hot irons and all these other medieval torture tools. They're far more sophisticated than that and just as damaging and bad. And it's not going to help our nation as far as international standing. All we've done now is basically, by Obama not condemning this stuff and actually, you know, going on with his drone wars all over the place, he is playing right into this. And I'm not saying this is just about Obama. I mean, all the elites are essentially going along with this. And while sort of backtracking and saying, oh, well, this is bad, but our country doesn't torture, and blah, blah, blah. I am sick of it. I am absolutely disgusted. And any decent human being should stand up against this and say, you know, we've had enough of this shit. I mean, if you have to torture other people, even criminals, and sink to that kind of level, I mean, it's pretty pathetic. It's really pathetic. That's all I have to say for tonight. Well, actually, I'm going to make another video, maybe, but that's going to be more focused on other geopolitical machinations. So good night for now. I'm not having a good night, because when I'm seeing the mainstream media and even some of the alternative media, it is just absolutely, it is disgusting.